Heavy leaden clouds blanketed the entire sky. Autumn had stopped playing with summer and fully asserted its rights. A hard rain was falling with no sign of stopping soon. Despite it was only noon, it felt like evening. Doris used to adore this weather. In the orphanage where she lived from the age of 10, she loved sitting at the windowsill in the farthest corner of the corridor. This was her private sanctuary. During unpleasant weather, she liked to nestle there hidden from prying eyes, with a book of fantasy stories, diving into the enchanting world of magic. Outside there could be a bitter rain or a winter blizzard, but inside it was always warm and snug. During these moments, Doris felt an incredible sense of calm and protection, reminiscent of her early childhood when she had a family. She remembered her mother as young and beautiful, always smiling. Doris pictured her in a light white dress with small polka dots, blonde curls cascading over her shoulders, and lips accentuated with lipstick. Her mother worked at the pastry shop, often bringing young Doris cream-filled pastries or croissants. At work, she was valued and loved for her easygoing personality. Doris's father was a skilled mechanic at a factory. Tall, broad-shouldered and vivacious, he loved lively gatherings. They spent their spare time like any other family, going to movies or parks. He would carry his daughter on his shoulders, her tiny arms wrapped around him in a mix of fear and joy, knowing he wouldn't let her fall. Her parents were a sociable couple, often hosting friends late into the night. These gatherings ended with a chorus of loud songs, much to the neighbours' chagrin. Doris couldn't pinpoint when their lives began to change. Over time, some guests couldn't stand after the raucous parties. Mornings often revealed snoring bodies reeking of alcohol, a kitchen table littered with forgotten snacks, and a floor lined with empty bottles. Her mother seemed to care less about her appearance, applying thick powder to mask her puffy eyes. She'd wear clean, albeit unironed clothes, and trudge to work. Her father, even worse, was often unable to think or move in the morning. His frequent absences finally led to his dismissal, despite his talent and merits. Her mother was shouldering the entire family's burden, her once sparkling eyes devoid of their former light. All day, Doris's father did nothing but scold everyone, blaming them for his misfortune and drowning his sorrows in drink. It pained the girl to witness her parents' steady decline, but she was powerless to change the situation. Money was scarce, and soon Doris's classmates began to mock her worn-out clothes and derisively call her alcoholic's daughter. But unfortunately, the mother, weakened by alcohol too, couldn't endure such a life for long. One day, after a particularly hard day, she got drunk and never woke up. The doctors attributed her death to alcohol poisoning. Doris vividly remembers mourning her mother near her coffin. Now, her family essentially gone because her father had become a stranger to her. After the funeral, he spiraled further into his addiction, rarely sobering up. It was unclear where he got the money for alcohol and tobacco, but Doris never saw her father sober again. She would leave for school in the morning while he was still passed out on the sofa, and return in the afternoon to find him already in the kitchen, setting up for another evening of drinking. He paid little attention to his daughter. Alcohol had transformed him into a zombie-like figure with a blue face, wandering eyes and shaking hands. However, this didn't last long. One day the girl returned from school to a shocking scene. A fire truck and an ambulance were parked near their entrance. The air was thick with the smell of burning, and around 30 bystanders were chattering loudly, pointing at what used to be their window. All that was left was a black charred hole, like a portal to hell. Her drunken father had fallen asleep with a lit cigarette, burning down the apartment and suffocating in the process. This is how Doris ended up in the orphanage. The constant noise and commotion of the orphanage wearied the quiet girl, who was still reeling from 2 funerals. A secluded spot by the window shielded her from the bothersome attention of the staff and other children. That's when she began to love this kind of weather. This gave her hope for the future. The weather would eventually calm and the sun would shine again. But now she was on the other side of the window, and the weather evoked entirely different emotions. The cold wind was furious, attempting to rip off her simple polyethylene raincoat that lay over a light plain coat. It was chilling her to the bone. Her faux leather boots were soaked, making an unpleasant slapping noise with each step. Doris trudged through the pouring rain down the grey city street, following wherever her gaze led. The few passers-by, huddled under umbrellas, paid her no mind as they rushed to get out of the damp. Cars were indifferent to pedestrians, splashing them as they sped through puddles. Doris's palms and knees were completely numb and lacking sensitivity. She needed to find somewhere warm, even if it was just an entranceway. Doris circled several buildings, but each one was barred by the cold indifference of a code lock. A brightly coloured supermarket facade appeared in the distance. It was a place to warm up and dry off. A wave of warm air greeted Doris as she stepped inside. The young woman meandered through the aisles lined with goods in brightly coloured packages, designed to entice shoppers. She didn't take a basket. What was the point? The only things in her pocket were a jingling handful of coins and 2 small paper bills. She'd have to live on them for a while, until she could figure something out. Suddenly the baby moved within her. Doris stroked her belly, trying to soothe him. "It's okay, baby." But her mind raced. How could it possibly be okay? With just 3 months left until the birth, she found herself jobless, penniless, and without a profession. Every potential employer took one look at her belly and turned her away. Even the lowest paying jobs were out of her reach. And, understandably, no one wanted to hire an employee who would soon go on maternity leave. The situation was a stalemate. She used to laugh at the over-dramatised TV shows where the main character faced insurmountable problems all at once. She marvelled at the wild imaginations of the screenwriters who came up with such intricate plot lines. She never thought such things happened in real life. And of course, she never imagined that she could find herself in such a situation. When did it all start? Probably with Claire. Claire was a carefree girl of Doris's age who ended up in the same orphanage during high school. Her mother was deprived of parental rights, but the girl did not grieve her too much. She was more bothered by the sudden loss of freedom she had enjoyed living with her mother. The nimble Claire ran away a few times. However, after each runaway, she always returned. She was entirely different from Doris, but she chose her as a friend for some reason. Claire often boasted about her past life, filled with parties, admirers, and their gifts. She was particularly fascinated by the material aspects of life. Before bedtime, Claire would share her dreams with Doris about becoming a model and earning a significant amount of money. She admired the model's glamorous and seemingly effortless lifestyle. Her ambition stemmed from her confidence in her looks, which she believed made her suitable for the modelling industry. Doris concurred with her new friend's perspective. Restless, Claire couldn't wait to leave the walls of the state institution. Doris was hesitant about taking such a drastic step, her fears holding her back. But Claire was unyielding, persisting with her arguments. What's in store for us here? A mediocre school, followed by a monotonous job as a seamstress or a cook. But you could be a model, seen by the whole world. Let's go. Your life is out there. The allure of a bright, promising future stirred their young spirits. Eventually, Doris yielded to Claire's persuasion, and they left their predictable world for one filled with dreams and uncertainties. Thus, one day, these 2 naive young dreamers walked into a modelling agency. Doris was nervous, expecting ridicule and rejection. However, they were met with interest instead. Claire, with her striking and provocative appearance, knew how to showcase her best traits. She confidently strutted down the catwalk with an almost professional gait. When asked to wear a dress from the latest collection, she promptly, without any hint of shyness, changed into the fashionable outfit, enhancing her appearance even further. Those around her nodded in approval, some even applauded. Doris, however, couldn't act in the same way, as it went against her nature. She began to regret agreeing to this adventure. People from the modelling agency scrutinised her like an item at a fair, openly discussing her flaws. She's attractive, even more so than the previous girl, but why so stiff? She's like a block of wood. Claire didn't appreciate the comparison. believing herself to be incomparable to her friend. Deep down, the seed of envy began to take root. Meanwhile, Doris started pacing back and forth, vehemently denying that she slouched or hunched, yet her shoulders slumped as if defending herself from numerous glares. Eventually, she was given a break. A tall, well-groomed woman, apparently in charge, told Doris that she had to work hard if she wished to stay. "I see potential in you, but whether there is talent, time will show." Doris agreed, having no other option. She couldn't bear the thought of returning to the orphanage in shame. On one hand, she was fascinated by the backstage glamour, the beautiful clothes, and the attractive people. On the other hand, she disliked the idea of being a silent mannequin for others' clothes. Claire quickly befriended several models, paying little attention to Doris. 2 days later, Doris was walking through the podium more confident. However, she was yet to acquire the inner courage highly valued in the modelling business. Meanwhile, Claire was consistently flattering Katrina, who was in charge of the girls at the agency. She seemed to be trying to convince Katrina of Doris's lack of talent. At the end of the day, Katrina announced that Doris was unlikely to succeed as a model, but she could stay on as an assistant. Doris was relegated to cleaning, fetching costumes and running errands. She didn't complain, and even felt relief when the attention was no longer focused on her. The only person who couldn't stop watching her was the chief administrator, Hunter. Hunter took immediate notice of the quiet girl with an uncommon appearance. There were plenty of beautiful models around, each unique in their own way, but Doris had something special, a trusting and straightforward demeanour that was rare among the models. Hunter didn't miss an opportunity to wink at her, compliment her, express his sympathy, and advocate for her whenever he could. Thanks to his protection, Doris was given the room in the dormitory. While she felt embarrassed by his attention, she was also profoundly grateful. Having her own private space allowed her to enjoy solitude and silence after long, hectic days filled with the incessant noise and running around. As she lay in bed each night, her thoughts often turned to Hunter. She recalled his casual touches in the elevator, the way he kissed her hand goodbye. These gestures stirred a pleasant sensation within her, evoking a sense of longing. On her weekly day off, she found herself missing his warm smile and his playful gaze. One day, Hunter called unexpectedly, inviting Doris for a city stroll. The prospect of their meeting made her heart flutter with excitement. Her young soul craved the emotional thrill of new experiences. Seeing Hunter in a casual setting, she realized she had long been in love with him. The warmth of his strong hands and the allure of his sweet words stirred a tender excitement in her heart. Love swept her into its exhilarating dance, leaving her no respite, and Doris didn't resist. She wholeheartedly embraced this relationship. She thought as though the entire world was created just for them, and nothing could stand in their way. The news that Hunter was married only briefly confused the naive Doris, because Hunter quickly soothed her concerns, claiming that his marriage was only on paper and that he planned to file for divorce soon, to be exclusively and eternally with her. Everyone at work knew about their relationship, but tactfully remained silent. Only Claire looked at her ex-girlfriend with a sarcastic grin. She herself was already in full swing romance with a businessman. One time, Hunter became distant, citing heavy workloads and fatigue. Their meetings became less frequent and shorter. He started avoiding talks about the future, a stark contrast to his earlier promises of a prosperous life. And soon Doris realized that she was pregnant. The young woman welcomed her pregnancy, believing that Hunter would soon divorce his wife for her, as he had often claimed. Hunter, however, was taken aback by the pregnancy news. He started interacting with Doris only professionally, responding with irritation and rudeness to her attempts at private conversation. In addition, Doris noticed that he was now looking at another model, the way he had looked at her before. Doris refused to believe that Hunter had left her. She rationalized his behavior, attributing it to his workload and believing that he would become a kind and loving man again. She remained patient and hopeful as her belly grew, and then she saw Hunter leaving in his luxury car with a new girl, and the reality of her situation finally sank in. In the morning, she resolutely came to Hunter in the office to clarify their relationship, but he only rudely and coldly kicked her out the door. The following day, she was laid off, accused of stealing a jewellery set. Doris wept, her tears smearing her cheeks, as she tried to assert her innocence. But the decision had been made. She had no doubt that Hunter, who sought to remove his former lover from sight, was behind this. Claire watched this chaos silently, relieved that her friend, a reminder of her past at the orphanage, would no longer be around. Katrina suggested that Doris leave amicably, avoiding involvement with the police. Of course, this meant she had to leave the dormitory. That's how, in that chilly autumn rain, she found herself in a store, seeking shelter to avoid the cold and potential sickness. The security guard began to watch her suspiciously. She had no shopping basket, but was visibly pregnant. For about 20 minutes, Doris wandered between the rows without selecting any items. Must be a thief. She's probably hiding stolen goods under her clothes, the guard thought, following her closely. Eventually, he approached her and asked gruffly, "Girl, do you need help choosing something?" Doris recoiled in fear, which only increased his suspicion. God, now I'll be thrown out of the store in disgrace, she thought. She went to the bread and cakes department and chose the most affordable bun. Although it cost her a few coins, she needed to eat. Even though she found it difficult to eat, she still forced herself to chew and swallow the vanilla-scented bun. It wasn't the child's fault for having a neglectful mother. The indifferent guard maintained a watchful eye on the drenched woman, quietly eating a bun by the cash register. There was nothing to do anymore. Doris had to go further, but where to? The disparity between the indoor warmth and the outdoor chill seemed starker. The biting wind seemed to be waiting for Doris at the exit, hitting her with a gust of frigid air and showering her with droplets. She entered a few small stores along the way, but the distrustful looks deterred her, and besides, she couldn't afford to purchase anything more. Little by little, the apartment buildings were left behind. Before Doris, a quiet realm of private homes stretched out as far as the eye could see. She'd never been to this part of the city. Enormous mansions were interspersed with smaller houses. There were no pedestrians on the rain-soaked street. The young woman halted, uncertain of her next move. Should she turn back and wander the cold, uncaring streets? Or should she go on, in hopes of finding an uninhabited, abandoned house where she could shelter from the weather and collect her thoughts? Doris stopped suddenly as her gaze fell on the high wicket gate in front of a substantial house. It was slightly ajar, almost inviting her in. Without thinking, she went inside the yard and knocked on the front door. Unsure of what she would say next, Doris felt this was her only chance. "Who is it?" a pleasant male voice inquired. "Hello, my name is Doris. I noticed your gate is open. May I come in to speak with you?" she replied, realizing her words might sound odd, potentially alarming to a stranger. Surprisingly, the front door opened, revealing a tall, dark-haired man standing on the threshold. Doris's eyes were immediately drawn to the white bandage covering his eyes and making it difficult to determine his age. "I'm sorry, I'm not here to steal anything, don't worry. I just need a place to avoid the rain. May I come in to warm up and dry off?" It was impossible to discern the man's thoughts from his partially hidden face. Anticipating a potential rejection, Doris stood partially turned towards the exit. However, the man unexpectedly said, "Come in. There's a kitchen on the right. Let's have some tea." Navigating by touch, he moved deeper into the room, inviting the unexpected guest to follow. Realizing the man was completely blind, Doris kindly prepared a hot beverage. "My name is Sven. So what happened to you, Doris?" he asked casually, as if an old friend had visited. The blind host's unexpected hospitality touched the young woman. She was finally able to remove her damp outerwear and waterlogged shoes. The hot cup warmed her hands and her spirit. The stranger sitting across from her did not glare at her or insist on anything. The words came out of Doris's mouth by themselves. She shared her whole story openly. Her childhood in the orphanage, her work, her relationship with Hunter, and her pregnancy. "So you're expecting a child?" he suddenly asked with kindness in his voice. "You must be so happy." "Yes, happy," she sighed thoughtfully. He then revealed his longing for children. "And I always wanted children. My ex-wife got pregnant shortly after the wedding. I was so dreaming, so looking forward to this child, but at an early term there was a miscarriage. After that, there were no more successful pregnancies." His voice was tinged with sadness as he spoke. After a brief silence, he started to share his own story. He had owned a small plant for several years. 2 months prior, there had been an explosion in the lab while he was present there. A wave of hot chemical vapours had severely burned his face, particularly his eyes. The doctors were still uncertain if he would regain his sight. Soon after the accident, his wife, Bree, had promptly filed for divorce and property division. While Sven was hospitalised and struggling with depression, his ex-wife managed to seize most of their assets, including those to which she had no rights. Sven could not understand how Bree, once a cheerful and kind woman, had turned into a self-centred woman focused solely on money in just a few years after their wedding. Engrossed in his business, he failed to notice that his young wife had made new idle friends. Their life revolved around maintaining a lifestyle focused on gyms, beauty salons, trendy diets, supplements and expensive self-development training. Eventually, she lost interest in her husband and their home. Unsatisfied with all this situation, Sven decided to reduce Bree's expenses to ground her in reality, but this only infuriated her. Their relationship soured further, and Sven's sudden disability clarified their who was who. Alone in a large empty house, Sven withdrew into himself. He dismissed all the servants, save for a maid who cleaned and did laundry on Thursdays. He always ordered food delivered to his house, and all day long he listened to music and audiobooks. His time passed monotonously and tediously, and he saw no hope or light in his future, both literally and figuratively. Doris felt sympathy for the unfortunate man. His kindness and sincerity towards a strange woman from the street, whom he couldn't even see, deeply moved her. Sven remained silent for a moment, seemingly wrestling with a difficult decision. "Doris, I have a proposal for you," he said hesitantly. "Would you consider living here and posing as my wife for a while?" Doris was taken aback. Did all men have the same intentions? "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone defiant and ready to leave the house of this seemingly perverse man. Preferring the streets seemed a better option. "You've misunderstood me," Sven briefly explained. "I mean, would you act as my assistant in public and be my eyes? I have an important deal coming up, and I've begun to doubt my employees. I suspect my ex-wife has bribed them to take over my business. She isn't content with less, she wants everything. I need someone I can trust." Doris sighed with relief, her initial fears alleviated. "Why did I immediately assume the worst?" she thought. "Sven already has enough to deal with, and here I am with my foolish assumptions." "Thank you for the offer. I won't let you down," she assured him. Grateful for the temporary shelter, she began to care for the lonely blind man, preparing his meals, reading books to him aloud, and running errands. With her assistance, he was able to venture outside. Her gentle voice accompanied him everywhere, and her steady hand offered support. As Sven held her warm, graceful palm, he felt a reciprocal response that comforted him and signified her reassuring presence. Being alongside this man lifted Doris's spirits. His serene expression, insightful words, and firm hand provided her inner balance. His close presence enveloped her in a comforting sense of peace, making all worries and sorrows fade away or momentarily hide. As weeks turned into months, harmony pervaded their household, their relationship always maintaining a friendly boundary. However, parting hands became increasingly difficult as they sought to retain the warmth and trust a little longer. The day to sign the documents arrived, and for some reason, Doris felt far more anxious than Sven. They arrived at the meeting a bit early, and they entered the meeting room. Doris was struck by the sight of her former friend Claire, a bright star amidst the serious people dressed officially. Upon seeing her, Claire merely raised her eyebrows in surprise and whispered something to the woman on her right, who Doris suspected to be Sven's ex-wife. The ex-wife looked Doris up and down, grinning, and then whispered something to her neighbour, a burly man with a thick neck and broad shoulders, giving him instructions. The imposing stranger called Doris into the corridor for a conversation. "Doris, as I guess you're assisting Sven, right?" he muttered. Doris could only nod in response as she stared at him, unable to speak. "Excellent. I was right. I see you're going to be a mother soon. I suspect you could use some money? A lot of money," he continued, his intense gaze making Doris uncomfortable. "Just imagine, you'll have your own place and a bank account with enough money for 5 years of worry-free living. All you'll have to do is avoid mentioning the contract points marked with a pencil." Doris exhaled deeply, summoning the strength to break free from the unpleasant man's hypnotic gaze. "I'm going to read everything that's printed in it," she declared firmly, before striding resolutely into the office. She was trembling with indignation, and the details of the unpleasant conversation reverberated in her brain. Could she betray the blind man who had given her refuge? Wrestling with her conscience was not for her. Sven, hearing Doris, discreetly took her hand under the table and squeezed it. She responded in kind. The tension subsided, allowing them to focus on the task at hand. For about an hour, Doris read aloud everything written on the sheets in the folder in front of her. Sven listened, nodding occasionally and asking for certain paragraphs to be re-read. There were a few errors in the contract. Hearing the oddly worded phrases, Sven frowned and stood, ready to halt the negotiations. The others quickly scrambled to explain the discrepancies as simple typos. The issues were swiftly addressed, and the deal was sealed. Doris finally let out a sigh of relief, shaking off hours of stress as she leaned back in her chair. Then she felt a sudden, sharp pain. Clutching her stomach, the woman hunched over and groaned. "What's wrong?" Sven asked with concern, placing a comforting hand on her. A wave of warmth and compassion flowed from his palm, easing her pain. "I don't know," Doris replied, sighing with relief. "I'm not due for another 2 weeks. It might be a false alarm." But another wave of pain overtook her, leaving no doubt the contractions had started. Feeling her distress, Sven quickly called for help. "Quickly, call an ambulance. We need to get Doris to a couch." The room sprang into action, and within 15 minutes, Doris was in an ambulance on her way to the maternity ward. Between contractions, she felt a profound absence. It was as if she were floating in space without an anchor. It wasn't until she was in the hospital that she realized what part was missing. The comforting presence of Sven's hand. Waves of intense pain periodically washed over Doris. Everything hurt, including her thoughts. "Congratulations, you have a girl! Look how adorable she is!" The midwife showed the baby to Doris, helping her to take a closer look at her daughter. The baby, with her wrinkled red face and thin limbs, appeared incredibly beautiful to Doris. This was a part of her. This was the little girl she had carried for 9 months, who was so eager to see the world. "Hi," the new mother smiled at her daughter, who waved her tiny hands, trying to adjust to her spacious new world after the comfort of her mother's womb. Doris suddenly felt an unusual warmth and happiness, and her body felt light. But lying on the hospital bed, her euphoria faded, replaced by anxious thoughts about her future. She was no longer alone. The responsibility for her child weighed on her mind. She found herself longing for the home she shared with Sven during their 3 happy months together. But she knew that her time as his temporary assistant was up. And They hadn't agreed on anything more. It would be downright insolent to show up there with a child. What was she to do? A few days later, her doctor said to her during his rounds, "You and the baby are fine. Tomorrow we'll discharge you. Let your relatives come by 10 o'clock. Doris gave a sad smile, thinking, "Yeah, a whole crowd of relatives will arrive tomorrow." The next morning, an elderly nurse peeked into her room. "Doris, your husband is here for you. However, it's a bit early. He's waiting downstairs." Doris was in disbelief. Did Hunter dare to come to the hospital? What could he want from her? After everything she had been through, she didn't want to see or hear from this scoundrel. Living impoverished would be better than living with such a scoundrel. Filled with determination and indignation, Doris jumped to her feet. Now she would tell him everything. Frowning and mentally crafting sharp responses, Doris descended to the first floor. In the lobby, a man sat on a bench holding a large bouquet of flowers, a white bandage covering his eyes. Doris couldn't believe her eyes. Her heart fluttered with joy. "Oh, Sven, it's you! Good morning!" Her voice wavered with excitement. "Hello, Doris." Recognizing her voice, the man stood and presented the flowers. "Congratulations on the birth of your daughter." "Thank you very much." The new mother gratefully accepted the flowers, holding them close to her chest. "Have you chosen a name yet?" Sven asked. "Stephanie," she said affectionately, burying her face in the bouquet and inhaling its sweet scent. "Beautiful name," the man smiled, "and I've come for you." Doris held her breath, afraid to disturb this newfound happiness. Could this kind, strong man truly want to be with her? "I would be happy if you and Stephanie took my last name," Sven said, breaking the silence. Tears welled in Doris's eyes at his tender words, which she hadn't dared to hope for. "But you haven't even seen me, have you?" she whispered, still in disbelief. "I haven't," the man responded, his voice filled with sincerity. "But I feel like I've known you all my life, even before we met. You're my soulmate. I love you." Overwhelmed, Doris threw herself into his arms, crying. "I love you too. You are the best man in the world," she whispered in his ear. They held each other until the nurse interrupted their embrace. "Hey, you two, are you going to take the child or not?" Doris and Sven, laughing, finally broke their tight embrace. They returned home with the baby and soon got married. Sven helped Doris take care of the little girl, and, unusually, she would quickly calm down in his arms. But with time, the man felt his limitations more acutely. "Doris," he said to her one day, "I've decided to have the surgery. I'm willing to risk it to become a fully capable husband and father. The doctors can't guarantee anything, but I want to try." Doris hugged her husband, then carefully removed his bandage and lovingly kissed his face, marred with burn scars. "Just promise me, if it doesn't work out, you won't be upset. I need you just as you are," she whispered, pressing herself against him. On the day of the surgery, Doris was a bundle of nerves. She paced anxiously in the hospital corridor, approaching every passing medic in hopes of hearing some news. Finally, the doctor emerged with a smile and gently patted her shoulder. "The surgery went well. Don't worry, we'll remove the dressing in a week. Until then, he needs to stay here for observation." Relieved, Doris exhaled, though her nerves remained. She longed to sit beside Sven all night, holding his hand, but the doctor disagreed, and Stephanie wouldn't allow it. She'd have to be patient. A week later, Sven was noticeably anxious before the significant event, clenching and unclenching his hands in an attempt to tame his emotions. His fate would soon be decided, and the course of his future life would become clear. The doctor had reassured him, but Sven detected a lack of confidence in his voice. The man held his breath, attuned to the conversation and activities around him. "You can open your eyes, but slowly, please," the doctor stated. Hesitant, fearing disappointment, Sven clenched his fists and slowly opened his trembling eyelids. Bright light burst into his vision, blinding him momentarily. Except for a white spot, he saw nothing. But gradually, the world around him began to take on a hazy form. To his right was a short, bald man in a white coat. To his left was a pretty, blonde-haired young woman carrying a baby. Her face was lit with a radiant smile, and from her lips came the familiar, beloved voice. "How are you, dear?" Blinking to confirm the reality of this miraculous vision, Sven replied, "I never realized how beautiful you are." He reached out and gently took the woman's hand. Doris blushed, her eyesight not yet fully recovered, but the progress was encouraging. The sight did not return completely, but even this result pleased and inspired the man. To punish his ex-wife for her betrayal, Sven took her to court and reclaimed his unlawfully taken property. No lawyer could assist Bree. The truth was on Sven's side. Reinvigorated, Sven returned to work with renewed itch. One day during lunch, Bree appeared at his workplace. She barged into the office and, uninvited, took a seat in the visitor's chair. She crossed her legs seductively and looked at her ex-husband. She exuded elegance and glamour, fresh from the beauty salon, in anticipation of their meeting. "Hi, Sven. I'm so glad you recovered," she declared, and Sven realized that her perfect appearance and captivating voice no longer affected him. "What do you want?" he asked indifferently, observing the antics of the traitor who had left him in his darkest hour. "Why do you speak with me so harsh? I missed you," she replied, brimming with feigned goodwill. "When I was in the hospital, you didn't miss me much. You never even came to visit. Were you too busy with the lawyers?" he retorted sarcastically. Bree was unfazed by his biting remark. It seemed she was prepared for such a cold reception. "I was foolish then, but now I understand that I still love you, just like we were on our honeymoon. Remember how good we were together." Her cynical attempt to evoke the happy times of their past had the opposite effect. Sven simply frowned and shook his head sadly. "You can't step into the same river twice. Too much has happened." Ignoring his words, the ex-wife moved closer. Her barely covered chest threatened to escape the indecently deep cleavage. "I am still the same Bree, the one you loved and passionately kissed on those hot nights," she purred seductively. She attempted to embrace him and kiss him, but Sven firmly pushed her away. "Stop this circus," he said. "I now understand your capabilities. Nothing can change. Everything is lost irrevocably." The young woman was taken aback. She had never faced such rejection, yet hope still lingered in her heart. "Please give me one more chance. I will prove my love to you," she pleaded, gazing earnestly into his eyes. Sven only smirked in response. "Did you ever love me? I don't recall such a thing. True love is different. I only came to understand this recently. I love another woman." Bree's expression quickly shifted, becoming one of contempt as she hissed angrily. "Is it the simpleton with a child from an unknown man, and who's claiming it's yours?" Sven couldn't tolerate this. He stood up decisively and pointed towards the door. "Get out! You have no right to make such a claim. Don't ever come back here." Bree snorted scornfully and slowly left, swaying her hips. However, the stirred hornet's nest was not so easily calmed. "My plan didn't work. He chased me away," Bree complained to Claire, whom she recently befriended. "He says he loves your orphan friend." Claire pondered this. Her desire to spite her ex-friend arose from deep down in her heart. "We need to separate them, and I think I know how," she said, her tone full of implication. A familiar figure appeared on the small screen of the intercom. Doris recoiled from the unpleasant sight. "Hunter, how did you find me? What do you want?" she asked. He smiled kindly, holding a bouquet of fiery red roses. "Let me in, Doris. I need to talk to you. These are for you, your favourite," he said. Doris hesitated. Her husband wasn't home. She decided to step outside and talk there. But as the lock clicked open, Hunter burst into the house, ignoring her protests. He thrust the flowers into Doris's hands and made himself comfortable on the living room sofa. "Is that my daughter?" he exclaimed, noticing the little girl in the playpen. "That's not your daughter," Doris said firmly. "But I've calculated the time and I'm sure that—" Doris clenched her teeth and asked, "What do you want?" Hunter laughed, stood up and tried to hug her. "I realized I can't be without you." Doris pushed him away. He landed on the sofa and laughed. "Why so cold? You used to be different." Suddenly, Sven appeared in the doorway. He glanced at Hunter, the bouquet, picked up Stephanie and went into another room with her. The uninvited guest quickly made his exit. Seemingly, he had accomplished the task set for him by Claire. "What was he doing here?" Doris's husband asked angrily. The tone of the voice was ominous. "Honey, he stormed into the house, shoving me aside. I didn't invite him over or call him," she stammered in her defense, although she wasn't at fault. "How could he not have been invited if he was sitting in our living room?" Sven retorted. His baseless accusation deeply hurt Doris. "Sven, you're shouting at me for no reason. Nothing like that happened." Her voice now filled with indignation. Didn't he trust her at all? Blinded by jealousy, Sven continued to fume. "Perhaps I returned early and interrupted your rendezvous," he sneered. This was the last straw. Doris loved Sven deeply, but if he was going to continue doubting her, what was the point of being together? Without trust, their relationship meant nothing. That evening, they spent the rest of their time in silence, each nursing their hurt feelings. It was the first big disagreement in their married life. The morning didn't elevate their strained relationship. Sven went to work without saying any words and spent the day troubled by these memories of Doris's audacious former suitor, who had acted like he still owned her. Could it be that her feelings lingered, since she hadn't shooed him away? These thoughts filled him with bitterness and unease. Then it hit him. He could check the security camera footage. The man's nervous excitement made it difficult to operate the keyboard initially. What would he discover? Betrayal? After reviewing the footage, he couldn't help but grin with relief. He'd been a fool. How could he doubt his beloved wife? Everything was crystal clear. Now, he needed to enhance their home security to prevent such incidents in the future. However, first and foremost, he had to apologize to Doris. "Oh, Doris, my joy, how I love you!" With this sentiment in his heart, he returned home, picking up a large bouquet of lilies and the finest cake he could find at the bakery. Now he would kneel and beg for forgiveness from his faithful wife. But the house was unusually empty. Pride forced the woman to take the child and leave, no longer feeling welcome. Again, Sven plunged into those feelings when he had languished alone with his depression. Total misery, and he blamed himself for this. Doris's phone was disconnected, and Sven had no idea where to find her. His heart was torn apart. His hasty conclusions and cruel accusations had deeply hurt his wife, forcing her to take the child and leave. He needed to act fast. Sven questioned all the neighbours for information, but to no avail. Doris had no acquaintances in the city to whom she could turn. Sven went to the modelling agency where she used to work, yet they knew nothing. He even visited the orphanage where Doris grew up, but found no clues there either. No one could assist him in his search. Late at night he returned to the empty, lifeless house. Exhausted, he collapsed on the living room sofa, unable to bear the thought of spending the night in their marital bedroom. After a sleepless night of worry, Sven set out at dawn to continue his search. He decided to scour social assistance institutions, hoping to find some trace of his family. One by one, he visited homes for people in difficult life situations, but found no trace of the woman he was looking for. As night approached, there was only one place left to check. With little hope, Sven arrived there, fearing if he didn't find his wife and child. "Yes, there is a woman named Doris here," a shelter worker told him, leading him to the room where she'd been staying since the day before. Doris sat on a narrow bed, gently rocking their daughter Stephanie in her arms and humming softly. All the eloquent apologies Sven had prepared during his search instantly left his mind. He could only fall at her feet and bury his face in her lap. He sat there for a while, not daring to look at his wife. It was only when she gently touched him that he stirred. Doris stroked his head and whispered, "What's wrong, Sven?" He raised a guilty gaze to her and said, "Please forgive me, love. I was a fool. Can we please go home?" Doris gave him an affectionate smile. Of course, she forgave him immediately. True love doesn't hold grudges. A couple of months later, the man arrived at his office in a light-hearted and happy mood, but he was met with an unpleasant surprise. His ex-wife was standing near the security. Sven was wary, expecting some sort of trick from her. However, he noticed that she appeared different. Her shoulders were slumped, and her usually regal posture was gone. Her face was gaunt, and bags under her eyes added years to her appearance. Her dark hair was simply slicked back, and there was something unsettling in her eyes. "Sven, I need to talk to you urgently." Her voice was no longer commanding, but pleading. "Let's go to the office," he responded concisely. Bree obediently took the offered chair and stared blankly in front of her, unsure of where to start. "What's the matter?" Sven asked, growing concerned by her distressed appearance. "A few weeks ago, the doctors gave me a terrible diagnosis. It appears my time is limited." Her voice was hoarse and shaky. With trembling fingers, she took a piece of paper out of her purse and handed it to Sven. He read it and sighed heavily, unsure of what to say. "You were right. God has punished me after all. I don't even have the resources for treatment now." She was silent for a moment before continuing. "I want to ask for your forgiveness, for everything." "If you're talking about the property, I've restored justice and returned what you had stolen," said her ex-husband, who genuinely felt sorry for Bree. Stripped of all pretense and artificiality, she was just an ordinary woman, tormented by illness. "You don't know everything," she said slowly. "In the first year of our marriage, I got pregnant and got rid of it, and then 2 more times. I didn't want children." Sven was silent, stunned by her confession. She had betrayed him from the start. "And I also wanted to separate you from Doris," Bree continued. Her gaze dimmed, and in a quiet, almost whispering voice, she added, "And I was the one who arranged that explosion. I wanted to be a widow. I wanted to take over everything as soon as possible. I now realize that I committed a sin, but at that time, my desire for power completely consumed me, as if a demon had taken over. Please forgive me if you can." The end of Bree's confession left the man speechless, grappling with the information. She watched him guiltily, awaiting his verdict. Finally, Sven managed to say, "I'll give you the money for treatment as much as you need, but I might never forgive you. You're a terrible person, a monster in human form." While this was happening, Stephanie slept peacefully, smacking her tiny lips in her sleep. Doris watched her with admiration. The baby was growing so quickly, developing new skills, not just day by day, but hour by hour. Doris wanted to take in and remember every first. Her first word, her first tooth, her first wobbly step. Sighing, the woman left the room and went into the living room. She turned on the TV quietly and picked up her unfinished knitting, a small pink cap for Stephanie. Sven came over and sat on the sofa, hugging his wife. "Are you watching those fairy tales again?" he asked, teasing her. Doris smiled warmly. "Yes, I've loved fiction since I was a child. And isn't our life like a fairy tale? I'm fortunate enough to meet you." Saying this, the woman tenderly kissed her Prince Charming. Outside, the rain fell softly, lulling the loving couple gathered around the family hearth. They were certain, now more than ever, that after the storm, the sun would surely return, warming them with its rays.